Hi, my name is Brian Clark and we're on location here in Boulder, Colorado, where today we'll be showing you how to build your own solar panel capable of producing 75 watts for under $100. So we'll outline the different materials and methods that you'll be using today to build that panel, and then we'll show you what you can do with your finished product once you're done. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the different tools that are necessary to build your solar panel. We're building the panel with a wooden frame, so you want something to cut the wood with. I've opted to use a skill saw to speed up the process. You can use a regular hand saw if you choose. And then also I've got a battery operated drill. I like to use pilot holes when I'm cutting, especially with plexiglass, to one, ensure that they're going to line up properly, and two, you don't want to cut the glass and shatter it by mistake. So underneath of here we've got all of the drill bits necessary to do that, and then here we've got the battery charger, and then also a very important spare battery. When you're using battery powered tools, they tend to drain the batteries pretty quickly, so to have a second one on hand is very, very key. Over here I've got a piece of sandpaper and an electric sander. This is actually powered through a cord, so you know, it helps to be close to an outlet, but if you are not in an outlet, go ahead and just, sand things by hand, just to kind of leave a nice smooth finish. Here's a caulk gun and some gloves. We're using silicone, liquid silicone caulk, which can get quite messy, so it helps to have gloves. And also when you're cutting, it's good to have a mask on, because you're going to have a lot of sawdust kicking up. So onto the multimeter, you want to make sure that it can measure both volts and amps. So you can get them fairly cheap, and you just want to make sure when you're measuring the cells that you can get both of those. So here is our soldering gun. Low wattage is the best. These solar cells are very fragile, so you want to make sure that it's not going to get too hot and it's not going to draw too much power. And another reason to wear the mask is when you're soldering, when you get the different flux and tin, it creates kind of a putrid smell. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of respiratory protection. So just on to some more generic tools. We've got screws. Stainless steel screws are the best to use because they're the most tolerant of conditions. And also a good way to make sure that they're stainless steel is to get a magnet and just push the magnet next to them. If they're attracted to the magnet, they're not stainless steel. If they don't have any attraction to the magnet, they're stainless steel. Next we have a level, some wire strippers, and Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. Mainly I'm using the flathead just to open the paint, but it's good to have on hand. Some clamps to keep your connections together. Just a little kind of a scissor plier kind of thing. It's got a really fine point, which is good for, we're going to be crimping the tab ribbon, so you want to make sure something like that will work. Fine point needle nose pliers would work as well. Just a pencil, X-Acto knife, and this is a plexiglass cutter where it's used to score the plexiglass, and then you put it on an edge and you can break it off quite easily. We've got a speed square here, which aids in making sure you got some 90-degree corners. Measuring tape, which again will help make sure you've got the right dimensions. You can't do anything without a hammer when you're doing carpentry. And we've got the paintbrush, obviously, to paint. Very important eye protection here. It's almost paramount that you wear these anytime you're dealing with power tools. And even when you're soldering, it's quite possible to have little flecks of tin come up. So you want to make sure that you're wearing those almost the whole time you're building this panel. And last but not least, we've got our testing block here, where you're going to be using it to test the cells to make sure that they've got the proper readings. So next we'll go into the different materials that we'll be using to construct your solar panel. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different materials that we'll be using here. As you can see, there are much fewer materials than tools. That's basically because these cells are going to comprise almost all of the panel. Everything else is just used to wire them together and to weatherproof them. The cells come in two different varieties here. You can get them with the tab ribbons already attached, or you can get them without the tab ribbons attached. So to get the tab panels, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're not going to have to work as hard. When you get them untabbed, you're going to have to actually take these tab ribbons and solder them to the front of the panels, and you'll still have to make the back connection. Here we've got the wire that we'll be using to connect the panels at the ends of the strings together, and then these will be the home runs, as I like to call them, the wires that come out of the panel at the end. You can use a really low gauge here. In the panel that we'll be building, the amperage, the current won't be much more than 4 amps, and the voltage shouldn't exceed much more than 20 volts. So, you know, a really small wire could be fine, even speaker wire you could use. I've used the red and black for the positive and negative, and you want to get something that's very malleable, that you can bend quite easily. It's just easier to work with. I prefer stranded wire over the bare copper wire if you have the choice. Now, when you've got the home runs coming out of the panel, you're basically going to have a positive and a negative wire. They're going to be live anytime the panel is exposed to any sort of light at all. So you want to make sure that you've got some electric tape and that you wrap the ends of both the positive and negative wires so that they're secure and, you know, as safe as possible. Here we've got these little things are called blocking diodes. We're going to be wiring them in series on the positive wire coming out of the panel. That basically prevents current from flowing back into the panel. The reason that these are important is that if you spend all day with a deep cycle battery and you charge it up during the day, at nighttime, without a blocking diode, that current is just going to flow back into the panel and drain the batteries. So you definitely want to have one of these. Side note, if you're going to be using a charge controller, you can actually get by without using a blocking diode. Just keep that in mind. Here we've got our flux soldering paste mixture that we'll be using when we're doing the soldering on the contacts. Over here we've got the solder, and that is a 6040 Rosen core leaded solder mix. So keep in mind that it contains tin and lead. So again, you want to make sure that you've got some sort of respiratory protection when you're working with it, as the fumes can be quite noxious and give you a headache. Here we've got some glue. You know, any sort of wood glue will work. I prefer to, when we're building the frame, just use a little bit of glue to keep some of the points together. When you go back later to screw them together, you know, the connection's already made, and you know that your corners are going to be nice and tight. Here we've got two types of caulk. This is kind of a cheaper version of caulk, and you know, this can work, but what I prefer is to spend the extra $1 or $2 and go with the silicone 2 caulk. This is going to provide you with the best protection from the elements, because once you've built this panel, you don't want moisture getting into the panel. Any sort of condensation that'll arise in the morning will reduce the life of the panels, and it will just reduce the efficiency. You know, if there's water droplets on the inside of the glass, you're not going to be getting clear sun into those solar cells. So it's really important that you make sure that you've got that panel nice and sealed up. And here we've got paint. You know, again, we're using wood for this panel, and you know, wood is going to deteriorate from the UV over time and from the elements. So you want to make sure that you give it a couple coats of primer and then go back afterwards with a couple coats of UV protected paint. And that just basically seals it from the elements so that it's not going to rot from the inside out, and will add years to the life of your